The film begins as Sal Frieland, a detective with the Metropolitan Police Force, heads to work. He lives in a dystopian society where technological advancement has made privacy obsolete. It is a government rule that every citizen must have an implant in their eyes that records everything they see. It shows information about any person or product the user may see throughout the day. However, as Sal walks towards his office, he runs into something really weird. He sees a young woman who triggers a glitch in his eye implant, and no data about her is shown on his head-up display. Though surprised, Sal continues on his way to work as he has many cases to look into. At the office, his first client is an old man whose son has not been answering his calls. Sal goes through the ether, a massive database of point-of-view footage, and finds troubling news about the old man's son. He hesitantly shares the video, which shows the son jumping from a building and unaliving himself. This devastates the old man, and he leaves the office in tears. Later, while going through his next client, Sal gets an emergency call to investigate a recent murder. He immediately heads to the given location and soon arrives at a luxury penthouse. Turns out a man named James Cray was shot in the head an hour ago. Sal goes through Cray's file in the ether to find out what the victim saw before he died. But to his utter surprise, Cray's visual record does not have his POV footage. Instead, it has been replaced with the killer's POV, effectively hiding the criminal's identity. This means that before he was shot, Cray saw himself through the eyes of the killer. Meanwhile, Sal's colleague, Detective Charles, reveals that this is not an isolated event. Another case from Baltimore was also exactly the same. The victims' eye implants were hacked before their deaths. They have no data or footage about who could have possibly committed these crimes. Suddenly, Sal remembers the mysterious woman he saw earlier that day. There was no data about her on the ether, so her head-up display was empty. He begins to suspect she might have something to do with these cases, so he shares his POV footage of her with Charles. The following morning, both Sal and Charles find out that the footage of the anonymous woman has been deleted from their ether. Later, Lester Hagen, a tech expert working for the police, reveals something sketchy with Cray's footage. According to the physical records in the penthouse, Cray had a guest at his home just before his assassination. But in the footage, he seems to be reading a book, all by himself. Similar thing happened to the footage of the victim from Baltimore. It is revealed that all the victims had one thing in common. They had hired an expert hacker to delete pieces of their visual records that were either humiliating or incriminating. Charles reveals that the last person who Cray met before his death was a woman. The woman who Sal saw on the street also managed to delete her records from the ether. That night, at his home, Sal is going through footage of his late son who died in a car accident. Suddenly, he gets a notification about another murder and quickly reaches the site. In this case, the killer hacked into the point of view of two women simultaneously. They seemed to be lovers, and only a housekeeper was present when the crime was committed. Sal accesses the housekeeper's file and notices that her description of the perpetrator matches the Anon woman. As he continues investigating, he hears a sharp noise and realizes that the killer might be nearby. His intuition turns out to be true as someone begins to run away, and the detective gives chase. The killer runs into a subway, and Sal also runs down a flight of stairs that leads into the subway. At this moment, his visual feed starts to glitch, causing him to fall down the stairs. Sal gets up and tries to look for the perpetrator in the train, but soon he realizes that what he is seeing is being manipulated in real time. Before he can do anything about it, the killer vanishes into thin air. Once back at the police station, Sal shows his footage of how the killer managed to manipulate his vision, but none of those illusions appear in his ether records. To catch this advanced hacker, he decides to go undercover. Sal creates a false history as a stockbroker who engages in a brief affair with a hooker. He wants the hacker's services to get this footage removed before his fiancée can see it. So he posts a vacancy for hackers who can edit out a person's footage from the implant. Several candidates apply, but none of them match the police's description. One day, a woman who uses the handle Anon offers her services to Sal. He immediately realizes this is the one they are looking for. Therefore, he arranges a meeting with her while keeping Lester on standby. The IT expert will try to pinpoint her identity when she logs into the ether. Sal, as planned, asks to have his earlier encounter with the hooker deleted. Anon gets straight to work and hacks into his memories, while Lester scans her frequency from the other room. Sal guides her to the exact memory and tells her to make it seem like he spent the night alone. Anon easily does so and explains that she will remove herself from his memory as well. Sal then questions what she will do about his memory of her and looks straight at her face. Suddenly, Anon points a gun at him and tells him to turn around. He fully expects her to shoot, but she disappears into thin air. Minutes later, Lester barges into the room and reveals he couldn't get her identity either. Back at the police station, Charles introduces Sal to cybersecurity expert Sal Frieland. The young man, who is also into hacking, has been recommended by the Office of the Commissioner to assist in this case. That night, they manage to hack into Anon's POV feed, but still cannot find anything about her past. Anon is careful where she looks, not giving many clues about her location. The men seem to be mesmerized by her beauty, but Sal carefully examines the images on the mirrors and windows. Later, they notice her enter the ether, but still cannot track her down, as she easily bypasses all the security protocols. She hacks through the eye implant of Jesper Nix, a money-laundering art dealer. Currently, he is dealing with Max Keener, a fraudster who is purchasing a forged painting. Anon removes this conversation from Jesper's memory. She then replaces it with a memory where he accidentally discovers this piece of art. The police officers, including Freer, watch her feed all night and yet cannot discover her location. She refuses to leave her room and has only analog devices in her apartment, making it impossible to track her. Early next morning, they are accidentally kicked out of her feed, although she had no clue they were eavesdropping on her. That same day, they learn that Jesper has died in the same way. The Commissioner of Police, Joseph Kenck, then arrives at the station, telling the detectives that this case is a priority now. He believes that there isn't a single person behind these cases. Instead, several hackers, who may or may not know each other, are anonymizing themselves to perform the crimes. To get a hold of her again, Sal goes undercover once more. Despite Anon's policy of not going through her client's files without permission, they patch his memory nonetheless. Sal pretends to have bought drugs from someone and hires Anon to remove the memory. Meanwhile, Lester waits in the adjacent apartment to catch up on her. She soon arrives for the meeting and jokes that Sal bought the drugs as an excuse to see her. While Anon works on his footage, he begins having conversation with her to give Lester enough time to bust her. He questions why she does this and whether she has an agenda. Anon initially dismisses his questions with vague answers, but there clearly is some chemistry between the undercover detective and the hacker. So, she eventually reveals that she started burning her digital footprint when she was 18. Anon didn't stop until she had replaced everything digital with analog devices. After she has expertly patched his footage, the two end up kissing and making love. Later that night, she goes through Sal's memories to delete this relationship, but while doing so, she catches a crack in his footage from a day ago. Anon looks deeper into it and eventually discovers his true identity. This worries her, so she loads her gun and immediately flees from the apartment. Just then, Sal, who is dressing up, hears a gunshot. He panics and goes outside, only to find Lester lying dead in the adjacent apartment. Minutes later, Charles arrives at the scene and tells a devastated Sal to go home and rest. The latter obliges and returns home, where he goes through memories of his son. Just as he sits down to drink, a message from Anon appears. She accuses him of betraying her and then hacks into his live feed. She begins to torture with hallucinations by manipulating what he is seeing in real time. On top of that, she makes him relive the accident in which his son died, over and over again. Sal stumbles outside his real apartment, plagued by the hallucinations. He sees that the lobby is on fire and that there are criminals everywhere. Unable to distinguish manipulation from reality, he begins shooting randomly. But seconds later, his neighbor emerges from a nearby apartment and calms him down. That afternoon, a tired Sal meets with Charles to inform him about his mental situation. But their conversation is interrupted when another detective arrives with bad news. Sal's neighbor was found dead with a bullet wound, and Sal is the prime suspect. At the police station, they go through his files and see Sal shooting his neighbor, but the detective vehemently denies it and demands an autopsy report. Once he has it, he points out the large bullet wound. It looks like the neighbor was shot by a shotgun. Since he only has one government-issued 9mm pistol, he couldn't have killed the man. However, the superiors reject his explanation, order him off the case, and place him under house arrest with constant surveillance. Later, when Sal arrives home, he is being watched by two police officers, one of whom is outside his house. He knows they have hacked into his implant and are also watching whatever he is watching. So he cleverly places his gun in his holster away from his eyes. Sal then goes to bed, closes his eyes, and pretends to fall asleep. However, he soon starts walking while still giving the illusion that he's asleep. He sneaks outside and manages to knock out the police officer in front of his apartment. Following this, Sal thinks hard about the day when they were watching Anon's feed. He had noticed certain details in the reflections of her mirror and glass appliances. With this information, he eventually manages to track her apartment. But when he enters inside, she is ready to confront him. Anon already knew he would come and asks him for a quick chat. She then reveals that she did not kill Crass or Nix or the lesbian couple or even Lester. She is being framed by another hacker with a similar skill set. Anon shows Sal her own video record of the second operation in which Lester was killed. It clearly shows that he was already dead by the time she was fleeing Sal's apartment that night. She also says that this other hacker who is behind all the murders has already hacked into Sal's implant. The hacker is currently seeing through his eyes or hers, meaning neither of them is safe anymore. Minutes later, Charles arrives at the scene to confront him about his behavior. Sal tries to convince him that there's another killer involved in this case, but the latter believes Sal has become too personally involved. He then suspends him from active duty. Later that night, Anon hacks into Sal's feed once more and warns that someone is coming for him. She then gets into her car and heads to his apartment. Soon afterward, Sal realizes that his POV is getting hacked in real time. Just like all the murder victims, he begins to see a killer coming towards him with a gun. Anon arrives and the killer turns towards her. In a shocking twist of events, the assassin is revealed to be Sal Frieland, the cybersecurity expert hired by the police department. Cyrus reveals that he has been obsessed with Anon for years. He killed anyone who had sex with her out of jealousy and erased every trace of her from their files. Anon tries to stop him from killing Sal, saying they can erase everything and simply disappear. But Cyrus is hell-bent on shooting Sal first. In the meantime, the detective has managed to grab his gun and starts shooting randomly towards Cyrus's general direction. He runs away, dragging Anon with him. Sal somehow manages to follow them, and when all three are in a lobby, he blindly fires towards Cyrus, and Sal can once again see normally. The detective then shoots Cyrus 3 more times, effectively making sure that he remains dead. In the aftermath of this event, the commissioner questions why Charles hired Cyrus, someone who has no record in the ether. But Charles responds that it was the commissioner who recommended him. They then realize that Cyrus had hacked their systems to make it appear so. That evening, Anon meets Sal in a public spot and apologizes for putting his life at risk to catch Cyrus. She tells him that her quest for anonymity is not because she has something to hide. Instead, it is merely because she does not want to share herself with the world. She then walks away and erases herself from Sal's files,